I want to begin with a deeply spiritual question. What does an apple look like? Of course, it's simple. An apple is red, sometimes a little green. It has a bulb on the top and kind of comes down a little. It tapers off at the bottom. It's got flesh inside that is white, but with like a yellowish, greenish tinge. An apple. If I have one right here. Does this look like an apple? Well, of course it does. So if this is what an apple looks like, well then, why don't these look like that? These hardly look like that at all. Now you may of course say, well, those are seeds. Those will eventually turn into an apple, but they don't look like an apple right away. Okay, well then fair enough. Hey seeds, be more red. Stop being so small. You've got to be bigger. You've got to look more like an apple. Oh, seeds, if you don't look like the rest of the apples in this basket here, you can't be part of the basket. Now you may say, well, that's silly. You can't just simply tell seeds to become more like apples. But the thing is, we do this all the time in the church to other people, but also most importantly to ourselves. See, we look at lists like the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians 5 that we just read. We look at the passage that says in verses 22 to 23, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And we look at our own lives and say, well, they don't look a lot like that. Maybe I do some of those very well, but I fail on those all the time. And we might look indeed at a few verses before in verse 19, where it says the acts of the flesh are obvious. Sexual immorality, impurity, debauchery, idolatry, witchcraft and hatred, discord, jealousy, and so on and so forth. We look at all those, well, I do some of those, and I don't do some of the other things in the fruit of the Spirit, so I might not look like a very good Christian, so I've got to start doing those. I've got to start being more loving, being more kind, being more gentle. And of course, it's not a question about whether these are bad to do. Of course, it's great to be more loving, more gentle, more kind, and to have fewer of those works of the flesh in our life. Just in the same way, it's good for a seed to eventually turn into an apple. But the question is how? Do I just tell the seed to become more like an apple? Do I just tell you to become more like Christ? Because we have learned all in these chapters before that we don't do that on our own power. We do that through trust in the Spirit. The way it happens for seeds is you have to plant that seed in the ground. And in the same way, we as Christians don't become more like Jesus by simply being told, be more like Jesus. We have to plant ourselves in the ground. And this is an image that Jesus uses all the time. Just look at the parable of the sower, which is in 3 of the 4 Gospels. You can find it in Matthew chapter 13. Jesus says that in order for you to bear fruit, you need to be planted in the good soil. Look at John chapter 15, particularly in verse 4, where Jesus himself says, remain in me as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. The point of this chapter is that we cannot bear this fruit of the Spirit unless we are planted in Jesus. How do we plant ourselves in Jesus? Well, Paul says it in verse 5. For through the Spirit we eagerly await by faith the righteousness for which we hope. What do? We wait. We trust in Jesus, and then we wait. Sounds kind of unsatisfying. Many of us are feeling, well, no, there's got to be more that we have to do. Well, no, that's the point. We wait. We wait for the Spirit to work in us. See, a lot of us might feel like we don't look a lot like the apple of faith. We don't look very Christian in one way or the other. Maybe in some ways, yes, but in other ways not. And we so want to become like Jesus that we hurry ourselves. Oh, we've got to get it done really quickly. Now, many of us are impatient. We want to look like Jesus right away. We look at our lives, we want to change it, so we want to do. But the thing is, we have to look at the example of even the disciples themselves. Look at Peter. He took a long time to finally actually get it. And even in the chapter before, here in Galatians 4, verse 19, Paul says, for my dear children, for whom I am again in pains of childbirth until Christ is formed in you. Paul has to wait. We have to wait. It doesn't happen overnight. which for us, of course, is wholly unsatisfying. We want things right away in this culture. But we have to trust in Jesus, wait for his Spirit, and then only then can we, as it says in verse 16, can we walk by the Spirit. Now, some of you are like, all right, I'm fed up with all of this abstract talk about waiting. Like, what do I actually do? So you want the answer? I'll give you the answer. Time. Let me ask you just a very simple question. In the last week, how much time did you spend with Jesus? How much time did you spend allowing yourself to put your trust in Jesus? How much time did you spend in prayer? And even if you prayed, was it the kind of prayer where you just simply list off things that you want Jesus to do? Or did you allow yourself in prayer to reflect on your life and give your life to Jesus? How much time did you spend reading the Bible? Not because just simply reading the Bible just to get it off of your checklist, off your to-do list is something of value, but how much time did you spend actually looking at it and allowing God to change you through it? It's not about simple quantity. I think it would be better to read one verse and allow the Spirit to direct us in that one verse than to read an entire book of the Bible without having allowed ourselves to put our trust in those words. And again, it's not about quantity of time either. Sometimes all the waiting we need is 3 seconds. How many times have we been doing something where we feel that conviction from the Spirit, where we know what we're doing is not according to his will, but we very quickly maybe shove it out of our mind or justify it and continue on with what we think is the best strategy? What if we took just 3 seconds to pause and allow ourselves to put our trust in Jesus and then allow the Spirit to redirect our life? It's not about quantity. It's about time. Time spent putting our trust in the Spirit. We live such distracted lives, and indeed, this is one of the things that distract us the most. And so I put to you that before you worry about having your life look like Jesus, you spend some time planting yourself in his soil. Have a great week discussing and reflecting further, and we'll see you next week.